The social worker didn't hand me a form to fill out or a number to call. She handed me a clear plastic bag with my mother's belongings inside. A worn leather wallet, a pair of reading glasses with a cracked lens, and a phone, shattered screen, dried blood crusting the corner. It took me a second to understand what I was looking at. My mother, a woman who still mowed her own lawn at 63, had been found at the bottom of her back porch steps. The official report said she fell, slipped on wet wood. Accident. I stood in that sterile hallway and read the word accidental fall 3 times. Then I folded the paper, put it in my jacket pocket, and walked to the window at the end of the corridor. Outside, the Florida sun was doing what it always does, shining like nothing in the world was wrong. Hit like and subscribe if you believe in justice that actually means something, and drop your city in the comments. I read every single one. My name is Joel. I'm 31 years old. For 8 years, I served as a Navy SEAL. I've been in places that don't exist on any map, done things that will never appear in any report. When I got out 14 months ago, I came home to Clearwater, Florida to help take care of my mother, Diane, after her hip surgery. That was the plan. The plan ended the night my aunt called me. I was in a gas station outside of Tampa when my phone buzzed. A known number, but I answered it. Joel. It was my cousin Bree. Her voice was strange, flat and rehearsed the way voices sound when someone has practiced what they're going to say. Something happened to Aunt Diane. She's at Bayfront Medical. You need to come. I drove 90 miles an hour the whole way. When I got to the ICU, my Aunt Sandra was already there. Sandra, my mother's younger sister. She was standing in the hallway with her husband Douglas drinking coffee from a paper cup like she was waiting for a flight. She looked up when she saw me and something moved behind her eyes. Gone in a half second. She reached out and grabbed my arm. Joel, thank God, it's terrible. She must have gone out to the porch in the dark and lost her footing. You know how the wood gets slippery this time of year. I looked through the glass into my mother's room. She was hooked up to 3 different machines. Her left arm was in a cast. Her face was swollen on one side, badly. A fall from a porch doesn't do that to one side only. A fall scatters the damage. This damage was concentrated. Which step did she fall from? I asked. Sandra blinked. What? Which step? Top, middle, bottom? I don't know. Douglas found her. I looked at Douglas. He was studying the bottom of his coffee cup. Bottom, he said. She was at the bottom. A 4-foot drop onto grass doesn't put a woman in the ICU. I didn't say that. I just nodded. I went in and sat next to my mother. I held her hand. It was cold and thin, and her knuckles were scraped raw in a pattern I recognized from my training. Defensive wounds. The kind you get when you're trying to cover your face. She had been scared. She had been scared. She had been fighting back. I sat there for 2 hours. When I walked out, Sandra and Douglas were gone. I drove to my mother's house. The property had been in our family for 40 years. 3 acres of coastal land in Pinellas County, bought by my grandfather before the prices went insane. Worth somewhere between $2 and $3 million now, depending on who was asking. My mother had always said it would go to me. It was in her will. She had shown me the documents herself 2 years ago. The back porch was still wet from the previous night's rain. I crouched at the top step and looked at the wood. No moss. No algae. Clean boards, recently swept. There was a smear near the second step, something dark, partially washed away by rain, and at the base of the steps, the decorative clay pot my mother kept there, the one with the big orange marigolds she replanted every spring, was pushed 3 feet to the left. Not knocked over, not broken, just pushed like someone had shoved it out of the way. You don't trip and fall and then calmly reposition a flower pot. I went inside. The house looked fine at first, but I grew up here. I know every corner of this place. The reading chair in the sunroom was 2 feet from where my mother always kept it. The throw blanket she kept folded over the arm was on the floor. There were 2 wine glasses in the dish rack. My mother doesn't drink wine. She hadn't since her medication started 2 years ago. The doctor had been clear about that. Someone else had been here that night. I didn't go to the local police. Not yet. I went back to my motel and opened my laptop. I had contacts from my time in the service. People who could access information that takes civilians months to dig through in a morning. I started with Sandra. What I found was not surprising. It was just sad. Sandra and Douglas had burned through their retirement savings on a restaurant venture in Sarasota that failed in 2021. They had a second mortgage on their house in Bradenton. Douglas had defaulted on a business loan. They were drowning, quietly and privately, the way people drown when they're too proud to ask for help. Then I checked county records. 3 months ago, a document had been filed with the Pinellas County Property Appraiser's Office, a quitclaim deed, transferring partial interest in my mother's property to Sandra Louise Hartwell. My mother's signature was on it. My mother, who had told me 2 years ago that this land would never leave our name. My mother, whose hands shook now from her medication, and who had never in her life signed anything without reading it 4 times first. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I called Bree. Bree is Sandra's daughter, but she's always been closer to my mother than to her own. She's the one who called me that night from the unknown number. That told me something. "Did you know about the deed?" I asked when she picked up. Silence. Then, "Joel, I can't." Bree. "They told Mom it was just a formality. Some tax thing. They took Aunt Diane to lunch and had her sign a bunch of papers. I wasn't there. I only found out after." "What else did they have her sign?" Another silence, longer this time. "There's a real estate agent coming Thursday. To the house. My mom's been talking to developers for months. There's a company that wants the land for a waterfront condo project. Joel, they want to move fast. Before Aunt Diane wakes up. Before you can." I ended the call. I sat in my motel room and did something I hadn't done since my last deployment. I went completely still. Not calm, still. The way you go still before a breach. The way your body quiets itself when your mind shifts into a different mode. I had been home for over a year. I had been trying genuinely to be a civilian. I had been going to a therapist in St. Pete every other Tuesday. I had been learning how to sleep again. I had been doing everything right. I opened my laptop again. The real estate agent was a man named Paul Gentry, operating out of a brokerage in Clearwater Beach. The developer was a company called Coastal Meridian Group. I found their LLC filing, their registered agent, their managing partners. One of the managing partners had a sister-in-law who worked at the county clerk's office. I wrote that down. Then I looked up the quitclaim deed more carefully. There was a notary stamp on it. The notary was a woman named Rose Patel who worked at a UPS store in Largo. I drove there the next morning. I didn't tell her who I was. I said I was an attorney doing a routine verification on a deed that had come across my desk. I described the document. I described my mother. Rose Patel's face changed. "That woman?" she said quietly. She looked confused. I almost said something. "But the other woman, the one who brought her in." She kept talking over her, explaining things. Said she was her sister. Said it was just a property planning thing. Did the woman who signed seem like she understood what she was signing? Rose Patel looked at her hands. I don't think she did. I thanked her and left. I had what I needed. I spent the next 2 days building my case the way I used to build mission packages. Methodical, layered, nothing that could be undone. I pulled my mother's full financial records. Sandra and Douglas had also added Douglas's name as a secondary contact on my mother's bank account. Done, apparently, 3 weeks before the fall. I found a power of attorney document, recently filed. It gave Sandra authority over my mother's financial and medical decisions in the event of incapacitation. My mother was now incapacitated. That document was dated 4 days before the fall. I sat with that for a moment. Then I drove to Sandra's house in Bradenton. I hadn't seen Sandra in almost a year. She answered the door in a silk blouse with a glass of white wine in her hand at 11 in the morning. She looked at me the way she used to look at me when I was a kid, showing up unannounced, mildly annoyed, working hard to look pleased. "Joel, what a surprise. Can I come in?" She stepped aside. The house was nice, nicer than it should have been for a couple with their financial situation. New furniture, new TV visible through the living room doorway. Douglas was in the kitchen. He saw me and his whole posture changed. "How's Diane?" Sandra asked, settling onto the couch. "They don't know yet," I said, still unconscious. "It's just awful." She shook her head. She was always so careless in the dark. I told her 100 times to get a motion light for that porch. I looked at her 100 times to get a motion light for that porch. "You filed a power of attorney 4 days before she fell." The wine glass stopped moving. That's just standard planning, Joel." "Diane asked me to, in case something happened." "She asked you?" "Yes. The same woman who has never let anyone else sign her car registration since 1987 asked you to have full legal authority over her finances and medical decisions." Sandra set the glass down. "I don't like your tone. I don't like a lot of things right now." I leaned forward. "I've seen the quitclaim deed, Sandra. I've talked to the notary. I've seen the bank account changes. And I know about Paul Gentry and Coastal Meridian." Douglas walked in from the kitchen. He stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, doing the thing men do when they want to look large. "You need to be careful," he said. "You're making accusations." "I'm making observations," I said. "There's a difference." I stood up. "I'm going to give you one opportunity. 1. Hold a power of attorney. Reverse the deed. Walk away from whatever deal you have with the developer. And I will consider whether to go to the state attorney's office." Sandra stood up too. Her mask was off now. "That land should have come to both of us. My father worked for that property too. Diane got everything because she stayed and played the good daughter. I was supposed to get my share. Your father left it to your mother, who left it to Diane. That's how wills work. Diane has everything and I have nothing," she said, her voice cracking open. "Not with sorrow, with fury. Do you understand how that feels? Do you have any idea?" "I think you should go," Douglas said, stepping toward me. I looked at him. Just looked at him. He stopped. "You have 48 hours, I said, and walked out. I didn't go back to the motel. I drove to a hardware store, then to a storage unit I had rented 2 days earlier. Inside was a duffel bag and a locked case I had driven up from my apartment in Sarasota. I opened the case and took inventory. This wasn't about going in with force. This was about information, about documentation, about making sure that when everything came apart, it came apart in the right direction. That night, I went back to my mother's house, not the front. I came through the neighbor's lot and across the back the way I used to sneak in after curfew at 16. The property felt different at night, heavier. The marigolds in the pushed pot were starting to wilt. I set up a small camera inside the decorative birdhouse on the rear fence post. Battery-powered, motion-activated, broadcasting to an encrypted feed on my phone. If they came back to stage anything else, I'd have it. Then I checked the one place I hadn't checked yet. My grandfather had built a small workshop behind the main house, separate from the garage. It was where he kept his tools, his fishing gear, his records. My mother had kept it locked since he died. I had the key because she had given me a copy years ago. Inside, in a fireproof box on the second shelf, was a copy of my mother's current will, notarized and signed 8 months ago. I recognized the attorney's name on it, Robert Tillman, downtown St. Traft. Pete, a man my mother had used for 30 years. The will was clear. The property, the accounts, everything. To me. But there was something else in the box. A small digital recorder, the kind you'd use for memos. A yellow sticky note on it in my mother's handwriting. "For Joel, if something happens." My hands were not steady when I pressed play. Her voice came through small and tinny, but it was her. Unmistakably her. "If you're listening to this, then something went wrong. Joel, I need you to know that Sandra has been pressuring me for months. She and Douglas came to the house in September and told me that if I didn't sign the property documents, they would tell the county that I was mentally unfit to manage my own affairs. They said they had a doctor who would write a letter. I was scared. I signed some things. I don't know everything I signed. I'm going to call Robert tomorrow and find out what I can undo. I'm sorry, baby. I should have called you sooner. I love you. The recording ended. I sat on my grandfather's workbench in the dark for a long time. Then I drove to St. Pete and sat outside Robert Tillman's office until 8 the next morning when his assistant unlocked the door. I was inside 10 minutes later. Robert Tillman was 70 years old and had the slow, careful manner of a man who had seen a lot of people's worst moments. He listened without interrupting. When I was done, he opened his desk drawer and pulled out a manila folder. Diane called me in October, he said. She told me what had happened with the deed. We were in the process of filing a challenge. She was going to sign the affidavit the week she was admitted. He slid the folder across to me. Inside was a draft legal challenge to the quitclaim deed, affidavits from 2 neighbors who had witnessed Sandra's visits to the house, and the letter from the notary. Rose Patel had apparently called Tillman's office on her own, weeks before I ever walked into her UPS store. What do we need? I asked. The recorder, he said. And your mother, when she wakes up. She woke up on a Thursday. I was in the room when she opened her eyes. The left side of her face was still swollen, the color of a bruise that started to turn yellow at the edges. Her eyes found me, and something in her went still, the way you go still when you're afraid to hope for something. Joel, she whispered. I'm here, Mom. Her eyes filled. Sandra. I know, I said. I know everything. Don't worry about any of it. She grabbed my hand. Her grip was weak, but it was there. The flowers, she said. Did anyone water the marigolds? I didn't answer that. I just held her hand until she fell back asleep. What happened next took time, real time, not TV time, but I had been trained to operate on long timelines, and I had learned patience in places where impatience gets people killed. The recording, combined with the notary statement, Robert Tillman's documentation, and testimony from 2 neighbors who had seen Douglas's car parked outside the house on the night my mother fell, was enough for the Pinellas County State Attorney's Office to open an investigation. The power of attorney was challenged and suspended pending review. The quitclaim deed was frozen. Paul Gentry, the real estate agent, cooperated immediately once he understood the legal exposure. He had no idea the deed was fraudulent. He handed over every communication he'd had with Douglas about the development deal. It was one of those communications that became the center of everything. In a text message sent the night before my mother's fall, Douglas wrote to Gentry, "Should be able to move forward soon. Situation at the house is getting resolved." Gentry hadn't thought anything of it at the time. He thought it meant the will dispute was being settled. The state attorney read it differently. Sandra and Douglas hired a defense attorney from Tampa named Reardon. Expensive, loud, and very good at delay. They denied everything. They said my mother had signed willingly, that the fall was an accident, that I was a paranoid veteran trying to control my elderly mother's decisions. It was Reardon who said that last part on the local news. Paranoid veteran. I had expected something like it. I didn't react. Instead, I called Bree. Bree had been quiet since our phone call. I hadn't pushed her. She was Sandra's daughter, and I understood the position she was in. But I also knew that she had called me from an unknown number that night. She had done that for a reason. I need you to tell the investigators what you told me, I said. Silence. Bree, I know what this cost you. I know she's your mother. But she put a woman in the hospital. More silence. Then, they took her to lunch at Bonefish Grill. Mom ordered the filet. She was laughing. She was happy. And Aunt Diane sat there and signed things she couldn't read without her glasses. And Mom just kept telling her it was fine. Everything was fine. Will you say that to a detective? She said yes. Bree's statement, combined with everything else, ended the denial strategy. Reardon withdrew 2 weeks later. Sandra and Douglas each entered guilty pleas. Sandra to exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Douglas to the same, plus a charge of elder abuse for what the medical examiner had determined were injuries inconsistent with a fall. Sandra got 7 years. Douglas got 11. The property stayed in my mother's name. On the day Sandra was sentenced, I drove back to Clearwater. My mother was out of the hospital by then, staying at a rehabilitation center in Dunedin that smelled like eucalyptus and institutional carpet. I sat with her in the garden for 2 hours. She had a physical therapist now, a young man named Anthony, and she'd already decided she liked him because he let her argue about the exercises. 7 years, she said, when I told her. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. A brown pelican landed on the fence at the edge of the garden and stood there watching us. She needed the money, my mother said finally. I know that. I knew she was struggling. You would have helped her if she asked. Of course I would have helped her if she asked. Of course I would have. She didn't ask. My mother nodded slowly. No, she didn't. She looked at the pelican. Some people can't ask. They think asking means they lost something. I didn't have an answer for that. I just sat with her. 2 months later, I moved back to Clearwater. Not into the house. My mother didn't need hovering, and she would have told me so in terms I'd remember. I rented a place 3 miles away, close enough to be there in 10 minutes, far enough that she could have her mornings to herself. I started working with a nonprofit in St. Mena, Pete, that helps elderly veterans navigate benefits claims. Paperwork that swallows people whole if they don't have someone in their corner. It was small, unglamorous work. I was bad at it for the first month. Then I got better. My mother replanted the marigolds in May. Bigger pot this time. She picked one that matched the shutters on the back of the house. I helped her carry it up the porch steps and set it in place. She stood back and looked at it for a moment. That's right, she said. That's where it goes. We went inside and she made coffee and we sat at the kitchen table and she told me about a dispute she was having with the homeowners association about the height of her bougainvillea. She had strong opinions about it. I had no opinions at all, but I listened. The marigolds were fine. The house was ours. Sandra was in Lowell Correctional, and somewhere in a rehabilitation center in Dunedin, there was a physical therapist named Anthony who was about to learn that Diane does not skip her afternoon exercises, no matter what he says. I'm not going to pretend it was clean. It wasn't. I sat in that workshop with my grandfather's workbench under me and my mother's voice in a recorder, and I understood in a very clear and specific way what I was capable of doing to 2 people who had put her in a hospital bed. I understood it, and I sat with it, and I chose something different. Not because I'm a good man, because she raised me to be one, and I wasn't going to prove her wrong. Now, I have a question for you. If it had been your mother, and you had my background, and you were standing at that back porch with everything you knew, would you have waited for the lawyers? Or would you have handled it yourself? Drop your answer in the comments. I genuinely want to know. And if this story stayed with you, if it meant something, please tap that like button and subscribe. It helps more than you know. More stories coming. I'll see you there. I've thought a lot about the moment I pressed play on that recorder. My mother's voice coming through tiny and thin in my grandfather's workshop, in the dark, surrounded by 40 years of our family's tools and sawdust and history. She was scared when she recorded it. You could hear it, that specific kind of scared that people feel when they've been cornered by someone they trusted and they don't know how to ask for help without making everything worse. She didn't ask for help. She left a recording instead, just in case. That's the part that stays with me. Not what Sandra and Douglas did. Greed is old and ordinary, and I've seen worse things done for less. What stays with me is that my mother spent months carrying that alone, signing things she didn't fully understand, lying awake at night trying to figure out what she'd given away, recording a message on a small device and hiding it in a fireproof box because she was too afraid to pick up the phone and call me directly. I think about why that was, and I think it comes down to something simple. She didn't want to be the reason my life got harder. She had spent 31 years making sure I had room to become who I was. Even when she needed me, she was still trying to protect that space. That kind of love is not passive. It takes discipline. It takes a daily decision to put someone else's future ahead of your own fear. My mother made that decision so many times, so quietly, that I didn't even notice I was being shaped by it. I thought I became who I am in training, in cold water, in dark places overseas. But the real foundation was built in that kitchen in Clearwater by a woman who made coffee and listened and never once told me the cost of what she was carrying. What Sandra never understood, what people like Sandra never understand, is that when you take from someone without asking, you're not just taking a thing, you're rewriting what you are. Every choice Sandra made in those months, from the lunch at Bonefish Grill to the power of attorney to whatever happened on that back porch, she made freely. Nobody forced her. She looked at her sister's life, her sister's land, her sister's carefully built security, and she decided it should be hers. And then she built a whole story around that decision to make it feel justified. That story caught up with her. It always does, not because the universe keeps score, but because lies require maintenance. Fraud requires coordination. When you build something on deception, you have to keep building, keep managing, keep making sure the wrong people don't talk to each other. And eventually, one detail slips. A notary has a conscience. A daughter makes a phone call from an unknown number. A son comes home and starts asking which step. 11 years for Douglas. 7 for Sandra. The property's still in my mother's name. I don't feel triumphant about it. I feel tired in the way that only comes after something that mattered is finally finished. And I feel something else. A kind of clarity about what I actually want my life to be from here. The work I'm doing now with the Veterans Nonprofit is small and slow and full of paperwork that would put most people to sleep. But when I sit across from someone who has been fighting a bureaucratic wall alone for 8 months, and I help them find the door, I understand something I didn't learn in any training. Strength that only protects itself is just ego with better posture. Real strength is knowing what you're capable of and choosing, every day, to use it for something that outlasts you. My mother taught me that. In a kitchen in Clearwater, over decades of ordinary mornings, she taught me that. The marigolds are doing fine.